Welcome to the Royal Beat. If you want to watch the latest episode of the Royal Beat, head to trueroyalty.tv or follow the link in the description. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to click the subscribe button below. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Royal Beat, the show that really truly gets to the heart of all things royal, and wow, what a week it's been for the royal family. Coming up on today's show, as the world tunes in to the second drop, the next 3 episodes of Prince Harry and Meghan's much anticipated Netflix documentary series, we're going to be discussing what we've really learned from the Sussexes and their latest offering, as well as the likely fallout from the controversial series. And to help us unravel all of the revelations this week, we're joined by the Daily Mirror's royal editor Russell Myers, royal journalist Katie Nicholl, former press secretary to the royal family Dickie Arbiter, and keeping it in the family, we also have royal correspondent Victoria Arbiter, Dickie's daughter. May I say the better looking member of the family, Dickie, dialing in from New York City. Lovely to have you all with us. We're recording this on the day that the series has dropped the last 3 instalments. We've all just watched most of it. What's your overriding takeout in terms of emotions? Ross, let's start with you.
One of sadness, I think. I think it all started quite angrily for the Sussexes. They wanted to get across the fact that they were the pawns in this big game. They were chewed up and spat out. That they wanted to try and get along with the rest of the family, but their popularity overshadowed everything else, and they were sort of persona non grata. And then it's ended up being you know, one big moan-a-thon, I think. But again, I'd say sadness. I think that Harry has tried to get across the fact that you know, he wanted to get along with the rest of the family, and that they were forced out.
Katie, you listened to some of the claims that have been pushed forward by Harry and Meghan across these last 3 hours that dropped today. What are the big standout moments for you?
Well, I think most of it is a justification for why they left and how they left. I mean, the one overwhelming thing that sort of struck me was that their sense of frustration, that they couldn't find this middle ground. They didn't get to have the meeting with the Queen that they wanted to have. They weren't able to have this sort of half-in, half-out role, which they believed could work. Frustration at plans being leaked, at not being seen, and not being listened to, and ultimately I keep going back to that very first line in the trailer where Harry sort of talked about this being a family that was a hierarchy, and it sounded so obvious for him to say it. And it was like, well, yeah, come on, you've been born into this family, you knew, and you've always known that this is what it's about. But at the heart of this seems to be this wrestle that they've never been able to accept where they are in the hierarchy. And it's very clear that they have taken on this institution, knowing that it's a battle that they will likely lose. But the one thing that's come out in all of this is that it is a battle, and it's turned into an increasingly ugly one.
It really is ugly. Before we unpack some of the claims that have come out of these last 3 hours, Victoria, what's the mood over in America? Huge viewing figures, over 81 million views for the first 3 episodes. It's outstripped The Crown in terms of its popularity. What are the Americans making of Meghan and Harry?
I don't think these viewing figures are any surprise. Certainly people were tuning in curious as to what they were going to say next. Was the alleged royal racist going to be revealed? And I think this is where the trailers actually did perhaps more damage than the actual series itself, because it bred this feeding frenzy and this sense that it was like ancient Rome and we were all going to be tuning into the Colosseum to watch gladiators duel it out. But what has been quite interesting here is that overall the US has been quite sympathetic to Harry and Meghan since they arrived a couple of years ago. But certainly over the last couple of weeks, there's been a slight change in the tide. You've heard a number of the morning show anchors being a little bit critical. There was one in particular who said to her anchor in London, you've watched it so we don't have to. That was a step aside from how things had been before. Howard Stern complained about them being whiny. I won't complete the rest of that sentence. The ladies on The View said that they're tired of hearing Harry and Meghan complain. The couple were mocked on Saturday Night Live. This is all quite new, and I think it speaks to the fact that there's just been such a saturation of all the ways that Harry and Meghan feel hard done by, and it becomes increasingly difficult to feel sorry for someone when they appear to be leading such a life of wealth and privilege. Now, I do think it's important to remember that no amount of money negates a person's pain or lived experience, but there's a point where you wonder how tone deaf this is when there's a war going on, when people are wondering how they're going to feed their families and heat their homes. And at some point, I think people are losing patience, and they're going to continue to lose patience, and we've still got a book to go.
Yes, we have. In the latest episodes, Dickie, what do you think will be causing heads to be in hands today? Because you were the man on the inside. You were the guy that had to respond to the royal rota, who are singled out with such negativity from both Harry and Meghan, to the point that they felt they wanted to move countries to get away from the likes of Russell and Katie.
I think the attack on the British media is pretty unjustified, because a lot of the stories were created by them and the media were just reporting them. Yes, there were some errors. There were some...
Give me some examples of the stories they created, just so we know.
I think the stories that they created, the way they met, as we saw in the Netflix documentary. I mean, 1 minute you're hearing they met on Instagram, then we hear that they were introduced by a mutual friend. What was it? One or the other. It can't be both. Maybe it was something completely different altogether. They were popular. Yes, indeed, they were popular, as we saw Charles and Diana in the 1980s. But they weren't pushed out because they were popular, because they were an asset to the royal family. And had they stayed and knuckled down a bit, you know, Meghan talked about a mould in the first 3 series of Wives. There's no such thing as a mould. If there is, Diana probably was it, because she was an aristocrat. She was brought up on the Sandringham estate. She played with Edward and Andrew when they were very young. She was the closest to the mould. But nobody can say that Meghan had awful press. Yes, latterly she did. Nobody could have bad press as Queen Consort. I mean, look at the horrendous press that she got after Diana died.
Fergie, much the same in the day.
Yeah, Fergie was already out, but the Princess of Wales got terrible press. Weighty Katie. Then she got accused of being lazy. Look at her today. The Countess of Wessex got caught in a sting in 2001. She got through it, and she's doing a tremendous job. So you've got to stick at these things. It's no good saying, oh, well, it doesn't work after 5 minutes and walking out.
Well, but do you, as they say, have to just swallow it, stiff upper lip and get on with it because this is what you've been born into? Or are they quite right to try to rewrite the rule book so that there is a little bit more compassion for them as human beings rather than public commodities, Katie?
I think it's been the undoing of them that they have tried to take it on. And you know, I think you're right. The Duchess of Cambridge, now the Princess of Wales, had to take a lot on. I mean, she may not have suffered racism, but she suffered classism. You know, she didn't have an easy time. Sophie Wessex didn't have an easy time when she married in. But I think they all realise that, you know, to a degree, you have to play the game. And I think, you know, Harry wasn't prepared to take that game and play it. Meghan wasn't prepared to take it on. And I think ultimately the two of them realised that they had this platform, they had this ability to challenge it, but it has been, I think, to their detriment. I mean, look at the price that they've had to pay. OK, they've challenged it, they've taken it on. Well, where do they go from here? What are they going to do now? We have to sit back and watch.
I mean, listen, they have lots of plans. If you look at the website, they wanted to stand on their own 2 feet and live an independent life. And they are doing that. Is there any way back, Russ? Certainly for William and Harry and their relationship, because we hear him chart the relationship breaking down through these last 3 hours that have dropped today, where he talks about the fact that, you know, at one point they'd had an agreement that our office will never be run like their father's office, and they won't play the game, and they will rewrite these rules so that institutionally they're not doing as the generations had done before them. And is that not fair enough to expect that in a modern world where, for example, you know, technology drives innovation and the way we communicate, that should change? Were they right to say, we have to be the change?
Listen, it's very easy in a very white-centric, middle-class media to comment on her lived experience. And I think that the issue that they had is that it was all fire and brimstone. They tried to attack it from the wrong angle. And I have some sympathy with Harry and Meghan in that sense. And then when you talk about Harry feels betrayed about his conversations with his brother when they were obviously young, children or young men, didn't want to go against each other as their parents had done, and or their households, and then you know, it's completely exploded in all their faces. So I think people will have sympathy for Harry and Meghan in that sense. But then on the flip side, Harry admits that they were planning to leave the royal family for a minute, what does he say, at least 2 years before they left.
But equally, I mean, there is a moment in the doc, and you kind of go, well, fair enough, where somebody says, you know, when Meghan is saying that she feels depressed and lost and questioning whether or not she wants to be here anymore, she's asked to defend that and there is an element of that, as like, you know, when we say, oh well, some people are struggling to heat their homes at the moment, what have you got to complain about? A mental illness is a mental illness, whether you're feeling low in an ivory tower
But she
in a
needn't have
castle.
felt alone on that, because Harry was involved in mental illness. She could have sought his advice.
But she
Well,
says-
to be fair, Dickie, he even says, I mean, it was one of his biggest regrets that he didn't step up to the plate. He felt ashamed that he didn't actually help her.
Well,
I mean,
he
I
talked
think
about his
there's just
institutional
so much...
role, didn't he?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting. He obviously felt that he couldn't support her in a human way because he had that institutionalism sort of drilled into him.
Yeah, that the moments of where she talked before in the Oprah interview of having to go to an event but having had suicidal thoughts literally, you know, that evening, not feeling like she wanted to be on public display. And his response was, we got to go, we're going to be late.
But she was pregnant at the time. She was under an obstetrician. Who else better to talk to start the conversation, to start being guided to the right person? She didn't take it into her own hands, and Harry could have helped on that. It's all very well blaming it on the institution, but at the end of the day, it's all down to the individual. Harry's made his decision to walk out. Why couldn't he make the decision to contact, say, Julia Samuels, a very close friend of his mother's and him, who is very much involved in mental health?
But they've said this twice now, and unflinchingly, that she wanted to get help, and she was told that it's not a good look. And to kind of...
Who told her that?
Well, and again, I would just say that would be strongly refuted by anyone within the household or the palaces. I
wonder why they keep pushing that, though, Russ.
Because it's a massive bombshell, isn't it?
That came from human resources anyway. She went to human resources. They're for the employees, not for the royal family.
And I think that's been argued this week, that the fact that Meghan said, you know, I was just abandoned, I was left alone, I didn't have anyone to help me. Well, you know, again, people I've spoken to this week have completely refuted that. She was given a dossier of how to sort of, you know, find her feet in the first few months. She was the Queen gave her one of her most trusted aides to be by her side, and Meghan made the decision that she didn't want to do that for whatever reason, and I think it was her undoing.
Every royal wife, Diana was given it, Fergie was given it, Sophie was given it, Catherine was given it. Some of them take it up. Meghan was given it, chose not to. The Queen Consort was there for her, chose not to.
OK, so well, that's an interesting insight into the... I mean, obviously, Dickie, you would have seen that play out from within the palace walls as the press secretary there. What else stands out to you as a claim that you would question heavily from these last 3 hours?
Well, you've got to go back to the previous series, to the first drop. I question, I mean, we've talked about this, everybody's talked about it, that sort of that mock curtsy and making a complete joke about having to curtsy to the Queen. The Commonwealth was something that really annoyed me, because the Commonwealth is not Empire 2, as
2.0. Yeah, they didn't say that, in fairness.
They
one
didn't
of the
say it, but
guests
one of
invited
their
to
talking
talk.
heads did. Afua Hirsch said, and it's not. It's a voluntary club. It's organised by the Commonwealth Secretariat. You can join it. You can walk away from it. 4 members who were never part of the United Kingdom or the past British Empire chose to join. Mozambique was Portuguese. Togo was French. Sierra Leone was French. You know, they don't have to join. They join because it is a talking shop.
They elect to join.
They want to be there.
Yeah.
So that was something that
In
annoyed
fairness,
me as
just
well.
just to go back to the curtsy clip, which has been used globally and has incited a lot of clicks. What she was trying to say in that moment was she completely misplayed that moment and overdid the curtsy. That's what she was trying to show, and yet it's being taken as her being disrespectful. What's your take on that, Victoria?
I think this is a huge part of the problem with the entire 6 episodes, is that so much has been left open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And that's what people have done. You know, here in the US, again, I don't want to speak for all Americans. There are Americans that love Meghan and Harry. There are Americans that love the royals. There's a huge part of the country that doesn't care at all. But largely speaking, the American reaction to the curtsy clip was, well, she's joking. She's self-deprecating. She's pointing fun at herself, saying how she messed up in that moment. Yeah. But of course, in the UK, the overriding impression was that she was mocking how we pay respect and show deference to the Queen. So I think it speaks to this big issue of culture wars, of this immediate reaction, incendiary reactions to things because something takes off on social media. And I think that is, even now, a lot of the theys are open to interpretation. They, the British media, they, the royal family, they, the grey suits that aren't really grey suits anymore. There's a lot of very strong, free-thinking women that were chosen to work for Harry and Meghan. So I think interpretation is kind of the overriding devil here.
Yeah, well, let's work our way through, shall we, through some of those points that are still left open to interpretation. A foreign organism is how Meghan describes being described by the Queen's former aide. She says that the private secretary said, and do we know who this person would be?
Samantha Cameron, I think, wasn't it?
Samantha Cohen.
Sorry, Samantha Cohen.
Samantha Cohen.
Yeah, I think she was named, wasn't she?
Yes. Says, it's like this fish, it's like swimming perfectly, powerful, it's on the right current, and then one day this little organism comes in, this foreign organism, and the entire thing goes, oh, what's this? What's it doing here? It doesn't look like us. It doesn't move like us. We don't like it. Get it off us.
It's a pretty clumsy anecdote, I think, but I can see what she was trying to get
If that was said, she has every right to feel affronted, right?
I don't know if she was talking about that she was affronted, but she was just saying that she was pretty much taken aback. And to be fair to her, as I think Meghan was trying to say, that all played true because, you know, she was sort of the person who did come in and from their point of view, that the royals didn't fancy her take on
I think by the time Samantha said that, she had taken a lot of flack, and there's only so much you can take working for those two.
You know, I think the thing is that she did have Samantha Cohen there. She did have support. So that sort of very much flies in the face of the suggestion that actually they were left completely alone, unaided, and ill-prepared for everything that, you know, they had to go through. So again, I think you can unpick discrepancies there as well.
Harry says the issue is when someone who's marrying in, who should be a supporting act, is then stealing the limelight or is doing the job better than the person who is born to do this, that upsets people. It shifts the balance. He says this is where things
started falling apart.
And then we see Netflix very cleverly cut into the Panorama documentary that William has requested is never shown again, where she says much the same, that it was difficult for her husband, who was a very proud man, to see the attention and the spotlight so firmly fixed on her. Are we seeing history repeating itself, and is he right?
Well, this is a theme that they first explored in Oprah, because Harry said in that how they noticed a shift in attitude from within the royal family and institution. When they went to Australia, it was a huge success, and they were generating more headlines than other senior members of the royal family. And so according to the Harry and Meghan narrative, they then recognised that it was threatening to the senior members of the royal family, and looked for an alternative way, whether that was disappearing to New Zealand or to South Africa to go and do something more low profile. So if you buy their narrative, then they're recognising this, they're seeing this as a problem, as history potentially repeating itself. I think if you spoke to people within the palace, they would say something quite different to that.
Well, they would say something different, because these people, they were sent to Australia for the United Kingdom because the Australians wanted them. So they were popular there. They were doing their job. So there was no angst over here that they are more popular. Same in South Africa.
Well, no, it was evidenced in the documentary. There was a reporting from across all of the titles that are supported by members of the press rota, the Royal Rota, that there was an evening of remembrance, a remembrance service that all of the royal family attended, and yet the papers all focused on Meghan as the main image.
She's the new kid on the block.
Exactly.
Right, so I thought that was a bit, you know, clumsy from their part, because
But the other examples they raised, Russ, were not so clumsy. They were pretty hard to deny. When we look at maybe the early coverage in their relationship between Kate and Meghan that the press drew, which Harry points out, we've got avocados, we've got two women holding their bums.
I mean, these are separate issues. I mean, some of the commentary and some of the articles were abhorrent. We've all, you know, it's undeniable, talking about straight out of Compton headlines. Again, some of the commentary pieces in certain parts of the press, ridiculous. But it stands to reason that when they were the new couple, I went on that tour to Australia, it was fantastic, the wall-to-wall favourable coverage. And then, as I said, you know, they were the new flavour. We'd already had William and Kate for a number of years, and so I don't even think the households were that particularly bothered. I think it's a nice, it's a decent narrative for them to try to trope out.
And it was keeping the royal family fresh.
Absolutely.
It was keeping them in the headlines.
Absolutely.
So would that have been the internal view, Dickie, as a press secretary?
There's no competition amongst the royals. Harry and Meghan were sent to Australia partly because Australia's is a realm state. Australians invited them, but the British government wanted them to go there in the same way as the government wanted them to go to South Africa. It's about waving the flag. And they did
so how
that
can
job.
we take anything that they say seriously from that one point that Harry admits we were planning to leave for more than 2 years? So they were looking for opportunities all over the place to say we were put upon, we had to leave. And I just, as Dickie says, I don't believe for a second that there was any major competition within the households.
And you just flashed up that picture before of the four of them together. The Fab Four was celebrated. No one was saying, oh no, this is no good, because you've got one couple that's totally going to eclipse the couple. The four of them were deemed a really good opportunity for the monarchy. So I think I think it fits Harry and Meghan's narrative for it to be, well, we were being accused of eclipsing. I don't ever see that. I don't recall that ever being an issue.
Just on that point, but why on earth would William and Kate want them out the picture?
They were the support
they've now doubled their workload.
Yeah.
They now have to stand alone. All the focus is on them.
Yeah.
They were sharing the workload, and regardless of whether they didn't get on at times, as they said at that Royal Foundation meeting, listen, it's a business, it's a family. People don't get on sometimes, but I just think there was a lot of convenient truths in this documentary.
One thing we did get was an insight into the close relationship that Harry had shared with his grandmother, the Queen, to the point that he says, I think in episode 5, that he called her to say, we want to come and talk to you. And she said, sure, I've got no plans for the week that he was requesting to see her. Why don't you and Meghan come and stay for the night? And then an aide stepped in and said, I'm sorry, get your principal from one household to the other. Make sure your principal doesn't contact my principal. She's not available that week. Harry then picks up the phone to the Queen and says, I thought you were free. And she says, oh, no, apparently I'm very busy that week now.
That's what we're told. Did it actually happen like that? We don't know, because nobody's going to tell us.
Well, he did.
Oh,
there were
Harry
two people
did.
in that conversation, and
Yes,
one of them's reporting
but Harry
it.
is in charge of this particular narrative. It's the gospel according to St. Harry. We need to know from the other side, is this what happened?
Well, should we give them the
won't
benefit
know.
of the doubt? Should we give them the benefit of the doubt and say it is true?
Yeah.
I think we can assume, therefore, that the reason that would have happened is because what he does point out in the series is that there is a difference between family and institution. And at that moment, at a critical moment in the family where their future was being thrashed out and decided, there needed to be that distinction between the grandmother and grandson role and the monarch and whatever he was then in line to the throne. And I think that's what it was about. And I think the courtiers were able to see that had Harry and the Queen met on a personal level, it would have complicated what actually needed to happen, which was a very clear outline from Harry that needed to be in an email on paper for the Prince of Wales and the Queen as to how he saw this working, and anything else would complicate it.
If they wanted this kind of come to Jesus moment with the Queen and that was thwarted, what then happened, they say, is that Meghan had to fly back to Canada because that's where their son was. and then the meeting at Sandringham was deliberately scheduled so that she couldn't attend. She says that. Would that have been the case? Did they want to keep her away from that conversation, Dickie?
Really, I look at it and I think the meeting was about the principals and not the supporting cast. And it was about the Queen, the then Prince of Wales, the then Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex. It was a meeting of the family and not the wives as part of the family.
But the wives are part of the family.
They are part of the family, but on this issue, Harry is the royal prince. Harry is the one that's chosen. He wants to leave, or he wants the best of both worlds. Russell mentioned that perhaps they could have done both jobs. The Queen had experience of half in and half out with Edward and Sophie. It went pear-shaped in 2001 when Sophie was caught in a fake shake sting, and the Queen said one or the other. And Edward gave up television.
You could also say entrapped.
Sorry?
You could also say entrapped. The News of the World entrapped
All right.
her for that story.
Whatever way you look at it, entrapped, sting, fake, whatever.
Yeah.
But Edward gave up television, Sophie gave up public relations. They came into the royal family, they're doing a royal job, and that's what they chose to do. And Harry was given the option, one or the other, but you can't do both because it is a conflict of interest.
I thought he was given options 1 to 5. Does anybody know?
He didn't outline what 2, 3 and 4 were.
Well,
he outlined that 1 was in and 5 was out, and it's a bit grey and unknown
he
what
said
was
he
in
went
between.
with 3. He wanted to go with 3. Let's talk about then what happened at that meeting at Sandringham. The Queen was in the room.
Not saying very much, apparently.
According to Harry, yeah. William was there, Charles.
Yeah.
So those were the people in the room. Harry says his brother screamed at him. His father, the king, said things that were untrue, whilst the Queen sat quietly and took it all in.
And
Quite a scene he's painted, isn't it?
Buckingham Palace have never commented on the Sandringham summit.
And they won't.
And I suspect they won't.
No.
But this is Harry's interpretation of what happened. I mean, it's damaging, I think, for the
Very
Prince of
much so, yeah.
Wales. I think out of everything that's come out, that is probably the most damaging thing. And I do, because I think it reflects very badly on
Looks
the
like he was
Prince of
backed
Wales.
into a corner and they were
He
attacking
then goes
him.
on to say that a joint statement was released without his permission.
consent, yeah.
Would that have happened?
Conceivably, yes. It was a statement on behalf of the Queen, and
No, it was a statement on behalf of William and Harry.
Denying that William had
Yes.
bullied
Yeah.
Harry out of the
Yeah.
family, which was
Yeah.
the story that ran in the Times. And that was, I think, the first joint statement in a long time, wasn't it? And Harry outlined that he had not signed off on that statement. And I don't know if I'm misreading this, but for me the suggestion is clearly that he wouldn't have signed off on it because he did feel that he'd been
felt
bullied out.
Yeah.
So, is that a fair and just gripe that he's airing there? Victoria, what do you think?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because again, it's only one side of this story that we are hearing. And I think we do have to remember that we have heard about Harry's feelings and Meghan's feelings. Well, William and Charles are human beings as well, and they have very human emotions. And I can only imagine how loaded that Sandringham summit was, because at the end of the day, William is the one that is most affected for the long term by Harry and Meghan's departure. When he looks at his future and the burden that he's going to carry on his shoulders, I can well imagine he was furious. Now, all of us, all we can do is speculate because we weren't there. But I suspect emotions will have been incredibly high. I suspect all 3 of them behaved in a way that they wish they hadn't. But I think with the Windsor men in particular, they're known for being quite stubborn, and all 3 have got to take accountability at some point. It's not just the royal family. And I think any argument, there are 2 sides to it. And we've heard how awful it was for Harry and Meghan, but perhaps they were at fault as well in terms of how they handled this. We're told the Queen was blindsided by their announcement. Harry and Meghan say she wasn't blindsided by the announcement. But I think emotions were just incredibly high. So it's easy to play the blame game, but surely everybody played a role in it.
We also saw, without knowing what was contained within the text, the response from Harry and Meghan after the Oprah interview had aired from William. That was a moment that Do you think that was unnecessarily antagonistic to feature that, Ross?
Well, most of this is unnecessarily antagonistic, right? Because
Right,
and I
even
think
more so.
what they could have done, just to pick up Victoria's point, and it's a really important one, because if they had some introspection by saying, you know what, we said some things, we acted in ways which, if we could turn the clock back, we wouldn't have done, and we're really sorry for that. But apart from him saying that he regretted wearing a Nazi uniform, and apart from him saying that he wished he'd listened to his wife when she had mental health problems, there's been absolutely no apology for their behaviour, and so it's so one-sided that it just becomes either a gripe or antagonising the other half of the firm, which they pretty much know cannot attack them or even respond in the way that they've laid it out. And I think that is what people will find quite unfair in this last three episodes.
Far from them apologising, it seems very apparent that they are still expecting an apology from the royal family.
Yeah, so how can you move on if that's the case?
Yeah, that seems to be very much... I mean, where does this leave the relationship, Dickie, from a man that sat within the palace walls? How can this be repaired? Can it?
With difficulty, and it probably can't be repaired because it's gone so far down the line. And remember, there's a book coming out next month.
What can the book possibly say that we haven't already heard?
Perhaps something in the book that they didn't want to say vocally. We have to wait and see. Don't know. Nobody knows.
Unless the memoir is, you know, an act of contrition by saying,
we
after everything, I'm sorry about the way that everything's turned out. I very much doubt it, to be honest.
Do you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's gone far too far. There'll be no way back for them, unless you know, there you go, their separate ways and down the line, and then where does that leave Harry? I mean, it's pretty sad.
Dickie, when you worked at the palace for Charles, for Diana, for the Queen as the press secretary, and Victoria, you were growing up living above the shop. On a day like this, talk me through what's happening within the grounds of the palace. How will the family and the people that work for them be reacting?
Well, the people that work for them will have watched, would have probably done a briefing note to the King.
What would that say?
Roughly what is in the 3 episodes and the previous 3, the first drop, what's in it, what it could be damaging, what Harry and Meghan feel, why they feel that they were pushed out. There'll be a whole sort of quite a thick briefing. Whether the King reads it in full remains to be seen. William will probably read it. He wants to know what his brother is saying not just about him and his wife and his family, but about the institution. As far as the rest of the royals are concerned, they will carry on as normal. It's business as usual. They're not going to let something like this, which people are going to view and have their own opinion, but they're not going to let something like this interfere with what they're doing, working on behalf of the UK and the Commonwealth.
Is there a moment for reflection here within the institution where they say, I think the point was made that William and Harry...
Are you talking about the institution or the family now?
The institution, the offices that support the family. Where you sit and say, there was a point made that William and Harry are the first generation to grow up under the relationship that exists between the media, i.e. the press, the royal press rota. And they are the product of that. And we look at Harry, who has dealt, obviously, with the same devastating loss his brother has. But don't you look at what we've just seen and see a truly broken young man?
Yes.
And don't you think that we have to? There is a cause for reflection here. How can we do better by the next generation for King's, you know, for William's children, to make sure that they don't have that same traumatic experience? Obviously, the loss of a parent has informed huge amounts of that, but we listen to how they have experienced. He has experienced growing up with the media tailing him everywhere, and it sounds like it's destroyed. Certainly his human spirit. Would you not agree?
I think he's a very sad and damaged individual, unfortunately, and he's looking for this solace. I think comparing his mother to Meghan throughout the whole 6 episodes was quite exhausting by the end. And I think that you speak to anyone who is in the palace at that time or friends of Diana will tell you a very different story, that they view these women very, very separately. And
but he doesn't.
Well, he doesn't. But is that misplaced? I mean, it's not for us, not for me to say, really. I mean.
I think to answer your question, Kate, I think when you look at William and Kate and what they're doing and how they're raising their children, just a small example being Kate taking the pictures of her children. You've eliminated that sort of official photo call that was clearly so traumatic for Harry as a young boy. You saw that.
We saw that
in those first couple of episodes.
And he was quite right to raise that as difficult for any child to experience.
Absolutely. And the point is that William's children are not going through that because they found a different way of doing that. If you look at the life that they're living now in Windsor, the regular school that they're going to, the regular play dates that they have, I mean, most people, I think, would be very surprised by how ordinary their lives are. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's largely down to a very, very effective partnership between William and Kate and some new boundaries that have been put in place and a more modern relationship with the media that is working. And I think where things are being conflated and distorted is you see in those 3 episodes that have just dropped, you see them going through the online comments and the Twitter narrative and everything else. You do have to have a thick skin, and I'm not excusing any of the trolling because it is unacceptable, it is disgusting, it is hateful, and it is unnecessary.
And it's not just trolling, but it was some of the press coverage as well.
And some of the press coverage. But William is putting his efforts into taking on bullying online. I mean, you see him getting involved with that. You know, I'd love to see Harry doing even more in that arena, and I think a lot of people feel, well, you know, perhaps less time whinging. You put the focus on what you went through. Now let's see you use your spotlight to try and change things, if not just for yourself, for other people as well.
I think the great pity is sometimes we see them trying to do that. There was great evidence in there about the kind of these bot algorithms that create this volume button on hate, right? Really great point that they make, but in amongst all of the other claims that are dropping around it gets lost, doesn't it? Because there's bigger, more juicy confessions to hold on to, which is a shame.
You know, this media frenzy, part of the blame's got to be put on to Charles and Diana, because if you go back to, it was about 1986, ITN made a documentary called In Private, In Public. It was 2 one-hour programmes in which the camera was invited into their home, into Highgrove, and the kids were filmed and the kids were talked to. And then latterly, Diana took both William and Harry to theme parks, to holiday islands, down Kensington High Street, to the movies. So exposing them to the media, and practically every day they went to school in Notting Hill Gate, there were cameras outside. Paparazzi, the general media, were invited first day,
but
and then
then
told to go away.
You could say exactly the same about the Queen and Prince Philip. They did the first documentary inviting cameras in. I mean, surely they have a public duty to show some of their lives. And that's what they were trying to do. I mean, we definitely remember the pictures of Diana taking the kids to theme parks, but, you know, down Kensington High Street, I thought there was an agreement.
Kate, that's what happens now. They do show some of their lives. I mean, Meghan talking about there were 40 photographers at Archie's first day at nursery. That just would not happen. I mean,
no.
William and Kate can perfectly easily take their children to school. They're not bothered. If one of the children is doing a sporting event, which they have been just last week, no camera crews there, no media reporting on it at all. There is a different relationship now. And I come back to this issue of did they have it all planned out in their mind, that they were looking for excuses to leave? I think that's pretty apparent now.
That's where you stand on this.
I think so, because it's come from the horse's mouth. I can't get away from it.
What's interesting is, Katie, you've just highlighted that actually all of the changes that he would have really fought hard to bring about have been happening in the Cambridge household. And they've been achieved behind the scenes. Yeah. He didn't feel that he could do that clearly, as is evidenced.
You know what, Kate? I think for me it all comes down to, I mean, I remember standing in Kensington Palace with Harry, talking to him at one of the sort of off-the-record drinks meetings, and it was very apparent to me that this was a life he resented in so many ways. He said to me, I want to be able to get on the tube. I want to be able to go to a coffee shop and get a coffee. I mean, he said on record he wished he hadn't been born a prince. He said that on numerous occasions, and I think that has come out for me so much in this whole series. He's been looking for his freedom, for his way out for so long. It's all very well and good blaming Meghan. I think she was just a catalyst. She empowered him to do what he's always wanted to do as he slipped further down the pecking order, which is to get out.
And
he does say that, doesn't he? He says, this was my decision, not Meghan's. And
He
it's
says
just,
it very
it's just
clearly.
lazy to blame the woman. Yeah.
And quite misogynistic as well, actually.
As he repairs, I mean, he's clearly, as we say, and he says himself, very damaged. There's been a lot of trauma in his life. The healing is so public in terms of what we're shown from them now. We've seen them in therapy. We see them meditating and crying.
Yeah.
And there is a part of me that really wishes that he could go and do that privately.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
What's Victoria say?
Yeah.
I'm always in favour of private, but I think what's quite tricky about the Netflix series as well is the fact that when Harry said nobody knows what happens behind closed doors, and that's going to be seen as an invitation by some to step right in. And particularly here in the US, the paparazzi laws are very different.
Yeah.
In the UK, post-Levinson inquiry, there was a dramatic shift in what was acceptable and what was not. And I think that's really been hammered in by the current Prince and Princess of Wales, the Cambridges as they were then. Here, if you are outside of your home, you are considered public property. It's fine to take pictures, and so the paparazzi is arguably much worse here. And I thought it was quite interesting, as the British press was getting a solid bashing there by Harry and Meghan, that a lot of the headlines that were coming up on screen were actually US headlines. They were Australian headlines. It wasn't just the British press that were perpetuating some of these stories that really antagonised Harry and Meghan. I mean, some of them were the National Enquirer. Who takes the National Enquirer seriously? So it's going to be interesting to see how they're able to navigate the future here in the US, given how salacious the paparazzi here is.
Thank you, Victoria. In terms of the relationship that the royal press writers share now with the royal households, I mean, does it reflect the way that Harry recalls it in the Netflix episode 4? I think.
Or you just pick up the phone and call the palace and say, "Can I have a story?"
Well, of course, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's the easiest job in the world.
Everybody's life would be a lot easier if that was the
If
case.
only.
He says that they are an extended PR arm of the palace, that you are.
Oh.
I think the palace would strongly disagree with
And
that.
that
We would
you
too.
have you achieve legitimacy by using royal reporter as a title, and therefore credibility. But actually, there is no qualification for being a royal reporter.
Well,
That is what he said.
and it suits his agenda to belittle us.
But you, I mean, listen, you guys have a right to
expectedly
reply. What would you say?
I think that it's all about agenda. It's all about setting one's truth out, and I think people are frankly think it's fairly ludicrous. I mean, there of course is a relationship between the press and the palace. There was a relationship between the Westminster lobby and the political party.
Both are institutions.
And the health journalists and the NHS. Of course there have to be relationships.
Yeah.
So, you know, for him to have just sort of cherry-pick little examples of what he wants to put his narrative out there, I think it pretty much stands to reason that it falls down, to be honest.
Before I joined the palace in '88, I was accredited to the palace for 10 years, never got fed a story at all. I was briefed about something that was going to be happening, just giving background information. When I was there, we never fed stories, and subsequently, since I've retired, still not fed stories. So this is
But we did see
nonsense.
evidence. We saw a statement from Ted Verity, the editor of the Mail on Sunday, who was being sued by Meghan Markle for the extracts that newspaper ran from a private letter to her father. And he says that he had sat down with a very senior member of the royal household, and that this wasn't a gossipy source, this was a well-placed source. And they evidenced that in the documentary, in fairness to them.
Well, I mean, there is relationships between newspaper editors or correspondents with members of the royal household. Of course there is. There has to be, you know, an open channel of conversation. But to suggest that there was, you know, favourites that were getting, you know, the phone picked up and given negative stories, which is what he's saying. I think that's totally ludicrous.
And
And
it's
they
an
weren't
extension
able
of
to
what
prove
Russell
anything.
was...
No, they haven't proved that. They have
But
Equally,
again.
we saw the People magazine cover, and we see Meghan's friends say, we took it upon ourselves, with her blessing, to give an account of Meghan that we know. How are the two different?
Well, because they're her friends, not the royal household. I mean, his suggestion
It's still
in the trailer,
briefing, right?
Well, yeah, but it's very different to one royal principal briefing against another to sort of save themselves negative headlines by planting something negative. I mean, that is incredibly damaging. It's very defamatory towards the palace. And as far as I could see from the 3 hours or so that I've just watched, I don't see any evidence that backs up what was said in the trailer.
And what doesn't come out is the fact that Diana used to invite editors to lunch.
Right.
And what happened over those lunches? What was that?
I do just want to add as well, years growing up watching Dad working for Buckingham Palace, and I witnessed firsthand the phone would ring all weekend on the weekends he was on duty, and the comment was constantly, no comment. That's all he ever said. Whenever the press called with some kind of query, it was no comment. He wasn't offering any kind of, oh, well, don't run with that. How about I give you a tidbit on X, Y, and Z instead? It was no comment. So, yes, I agree with it, Katie, that just said it is. It's highly defamatory to suggest that the palace was sowing these negative seeds on purpose. Because as well, how does that benefit the monarchy? The idea is to keep it all positive and happy and everything is wonderful about the monarchy. Why would you purposefully sabotage the very institution that they're supposed to be protecting?
OK, well, interesting to see where on earth the Sussexes go from here. Your predictions. We've got a book to drop in January, but then what? What does 2023 look like for Meghan and Harry, do you think? Victoria?
I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens stateside, simply because Netflix has had their pound of flesh now. What else could they possibly want from Harry and Meghan? They've got this multi-gazillion-dollar contract. We don't know the exact figure. We've heard anything from 88 million to 100 million. But now that they've had this, what else could they possibly want? The same with Spotify. But also Hollywood is notorious for avoiding negativity like the plague. They don't like anything that could potentially harm the glimmer and the stardust of Hollywood. So it's going to be quite interesting to see if this slightly less sympathetic approach to Harry and Meghan continues, if Hollywood starts to pull back. I do think it was interesting that there were a number of people not included in this series that perhaps you would have heard from, whether it was Oprah or Gayle King or the Obamas or the Clooneys. There's a lot of people that they didn't call on. So I suspect that Harry and Meghan are going to want to continue the work of their foundation, to promote their charitable endeavours, but what kind of cachet do they have once they've sold out all of their royal stories? We'll have to wait and see.
I mean, I'm sure they'll want to continue with their charity work, but how are they going to pay their bills, do you think?
That's the big question, because they need money. They're living in a very expensive area, not the most expensive house in the area, but nevertheless it is expensive. They have developed tastes that are costly, and how are they going to earn their money? We have to wait and see.
Well, Harry's spoken about having to close this chapter in order to move on to the next. It's taken him a good couple of years to do it. You have to hope through all of this soul-searching and telling of their narrative. I mean, I'd like to see them, you know, go off and become the global philanthropists who can really do actually a huge amount of good for some really important causes. Go and do what you said you'd set out to do.
Yeah.
Well, Harry is already in discussions with other TV executives about sitting down and doing another round of TV interviews to publicise the book. So,
well, he is going to have to, isn't he? He's got to publish it.
Well, he will do.
But he won't get paid for those interviews.
Well, he won't get paid, but he's already getting 30-odd million to do the book. So it's part, you know, he'll have obligations that he's even got to drudge up all this again. So I think there'll be another Netflix series. I think that's a good shout about their charitable endeavours. It will kind of soft the attitudes again towards them, because they started off doing that, then they've dropped all this bombshells and muckraking all over the family, and they have to soften the public perception of themselves.
And you mentioned the family, Russ, and I think, you know, there has to be some reconciliation here. This idea of a rift at the heart of the House of Windsor, which is what it is, on the eve of the King's coronation. The first months
just months after the death of the Queen.
And the early months of King Charles III's reign pretty much being dominated by these headlines. A rival royal court across the Atlantic. This is not the start to the reign of King Charles III that the King would have wanted. This has to be sorted out.
There's lots of reports about them. This, you know, the new year will herald a new beginning for them. Lots of olive branches. I mean, I can't imagine that it will be solved that easily or that quickly. I think there's an awful lot of time to go before that happens.
They
Quite the
created
full
the
stop
scenario.
that everybody thought more sort of to be continued, do we think?
Yes.
Some ellipsis.
Well, yeah, to quote Meghan. Thank you so much for, as always, your insight and your years of experience. Victoria, great to have you join us all the way from New York. No doubt we'll be picking this up with you next year. Just a shame, isn't it? What a
Very
sad
sad.
and sorry
Very sad.
state of affairs.
Sorry way to end the year.
It really is, isn't it?
Yep.
At the end of so much loss this year and change. But we will be back in time for Christmas, so don't worry, we're not leaving you on that sour note. My thanks to you, Russ, to Katie, to Dickie and to Victoria, and to you for watching. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. We'll see you then. Don't forget, you can watch the latest episode of The Royal Beat at trueroyalty.tv.